course, not every final line has to be grandioso or pithy to be noteworthy. Sometimes a good line is just a good line, and on occasion a final line is simply the best possible end to a bad situation for the characters. Whether they have left us hanging off a cliff, deep in existential thought, feeling the feels, lost in retrospection, or laughing along, and everything in between. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with Trek Culture, here with the 10 best final lines in Star Trek episodes. Number 10. Computer, end program. Who here hasn't uttered the words computer, end program whilst deep in some ontological crisis about the nature of reality? No? Well, that's the whimsical little existential query that Lieutenant Barclay makes manifest at the very end of the Next Generation episode Ship in a Bottle. He, Picard and Data have escaped Professor Moriarty's clutches with some clever holographic mise en abîme, and the latter, accompanied by the Countess Bartholomew, is then set to live out the rest of his days inside a yellow cube of active memory. In theory, none the wiser as to the true nature of the world around him. Picard further speculates that we all might be living a simulation in a device sitting on someone's table. And it's this that leads Barclay to speak the titular line that concludes the episode. Barclay was first included in this episode because it was felt that there needed to be a character who was unaware of holographic Moriarty's creation. But when it became unnecessary to the story, it was nonetheless decided that Barclay was the best character to deliver the final line. It also looks like Moriarty, presumably looking for an expansion pack, is set to return in Season 3 of Star Trek Picard, to be played by the same actor Daniel Davis, making that final line ever more prescient. Number 9. Sounds to me like we've only postponed the invasion until what, the 24th century? With a note of dramatic irony, the last line of the Enterprise episode Regeneration wraps up the events of First Contact and anticipates the arrival of the Borg in the Next Generation. In the episode, a team of scientists find the wreckage of a ship that crashed in the Arctic 100 years prior. With it, they also discover certain cybernetic creatures all too familiar to the audience, but unknown to the unwitting researchers. The moment they bring the alien corpses back to the lab is enough to have any fan screaming at the television, "No, get them out of there!" in anticipation of the move the Borg are going to pull. Further observations from the scientists, such as "I think this ship was a perfect sphere," only adds to the dramatic tension that results from the viewer being in the position of familiarity. It is ultimately this disconnect of information that is key to the success of the episode, and what makes its final line so effective. It re-establishes the Borg in a position of dominance and real threat. The viewer is then allowed to be afraid again on behalf of the less well-informed characters. Wibbly wobbly borgy wargy, you might say, but this episode certainly attracted its fair share of ire for supposedly mucking around with the continuity. However, this line is actually an attempt to explain why the Borg are on our side of the galaxy when they're first mentioned in the Next Generation episode The Neutral Zone. So, parsimony, not paradox. And really, the Enterprise E crew should have done a better cleanup job. Number 8. 60,000 light years seems a little closer today. When the Doctor is transferred back to Voyager from the Alpha Quadrant in Message in a Bottle, he returns with news that Starfleet now knows the crew is alive and will do everything to get them home. Captain Janeway gives this line in reply, and we are all a little moved as a result. In its conclusion of the episode, the line is a major turning point for the series as the tone shifts towards contact with and the eventuality of returning to Earth. Apparently, this scene was intended to take place in the mess hall with the entire crew for, according to Robert Picardo, a big emotional moment with all these extras. But they decided that this was too much like the Waltons, and so they scaled back their plans, and the scene took place in sickbay with Janeway, Tuvok, Chakotay, and the Doctor. Number 7. Set a course for home. Set a course for home, spoken by Captain Janeway, ends the Star Trek Voyager pilot Caretaker that begins the series, and it equally concludes the series finale Endgame just before Voyager is seen sailing towards Earth. This is a decidedly elegant way to bookend the series, using the 5 words that summarize the crew's overarching mission. Endgame might have had a very different ending, however. As producer Rick Berman has discussed, when the story for the final episode was being outlined, many directions were considered for Voyager's ultimate fate, including one that would have seen the crew remain in the Delta Quadrant. According to Berman, they held on to this idea for at least a month, and had intended to make the point that the meaning of all all this was the journey. In the actual episode, this is echoed in Harry Kim's impassioned speech as he realizes that the destination is of less importance than the people he shares it with. Either way, the line may well have remained the same. It does seem fitting for both situations, however, it probably wouldn't have had such an emotional impact if Voyager hadn't have made it home. Number 6. Where there'll be no Tribble at all. At the end of the second season episode of the original series, The Trouble with Tribbles, Kirk is wondering how the crew have rid the Enterprise of certain squeaky little populators. No one seems to want to answer until Scotty finally admits that he beamed them all to the engine room of the departing Klingon vessel, adding the now iconic line, "Where there'll be no Tribble at all." The bridge bursts into fits of laughter, and you'd be a cold-hearted viewer if you didn't at least crack a smile. This episode is regularly voted as one of Star Trek's all-time bests, and as the final line would indicate, it particularly stands out for its deliberate comedic style. It did divide the original series producers and writers, however, many of whom, including Gene Roddenberry, weren't overly keen on the less-than-serious subject matter. Disagreements about the show's tone between Roddenberry and the then more comedy-orientated series producer Gene Kuhn are cited to be one of the reasons for the latter's departure from the show midway through the second season. After all these years, the episode and its memorable final line continue to show that Star Trek does well when it's having a little fun. Each of the subsequent series, and even the darker Discovery and Picard, have had their fair share of comedy. Gene Roddenberry also later chose The Trouble with Tribbles as one of his favourite episodes. Number 5. Let's get the hell out of here. The last line of The City on the Edge of Forever goes to Captain Kirk. He has been forced to allow and to witness the death of Edith Keeler so as to prevent catastrophic changes in the timeline. The line encapsulates both Kirk's sadness and his frustration. Now considered one of the greats, the episode's script, final line and production faced more problems than McCoy hopped up on Cordrazine. The pitch and original script were the work of noted science fiction writer Harlan Ellison, but contained some very un-Star Trek ideas, including drug dealing and murder between the Enterprise crew, arguments, Spock calling humanity barbaric, Kirk suggesting that Spock should be lynched, execution by firing squad, and it would have cost a small fortune to film. The script was sent for multiple rewrites by various parties and lasted for months, and resulted in years of animosity between Ellison and Gene Roddenberry. In the end, it was also the most costly episode of the first season. In Ellison's first script, Kirk hesitates and does not prevent Keeler's rescue. It is Spock who intervenes at the last moment. The episode's final line was also initially problematic for broadcaster NBC on account of its infernal obscenity. After some persuasion from Roddenberry and William Shatner, the line and its offending term were permitted, becoming one of the first uses of the word hell as such on American television. Number 4. Just give it some thought. Captain Janeway's deliciously sardonic FU to the now not-so-cocksure Kuros of the Think Tank comes in the Voyager episode Think Tank. Kuros appears on the bridge in isomorphic form to make one last desperate plea to Seven of Nine to join his crew, but Janeway reminds him that a good guest knows when he's outstayed his welcome. Clearly in trouble, his holographic form falters, and Janeway delivers her final blow. Voyager then warps away as the Hazari vessels continue their triumphant attack. They have all outthought the Think Tank. This line is a brilliant conclusion to an excellent episode full of twists and turns, strong characters, and underscored with enjoyable camp comedy. Kate Mulgrew as Janeway plays against Jason Alexander of Seinfeld fame, who gives a brilliant performance as the conniving Kuros. Mulgrew delivers the line with a brilliant touch of rising intonation and a wry smile. Jason Alexander is also an unabashed mega fan of Star Trek and has stated that part of the reason he became an actor was because of watching William Shatner as James Tiberius Kirk. He had always wanted to appear on the show, but as an alien, not a human. When just that opportunity arose for the episode of Voyager, he even brought his children to set to see him, adding that he was thrilled with the episode. Number 3. Well, I guess we're about to find out. This line forms the dramatic conclusion to the Season 6 Deep Space Nine episode Favor the Bold. As Sisko prepares to retake the station from the Dominion, he first quotes an old saying, "Fortune favors the bold," wondering whether his gamble will pay off. In any case, with the Cardassians and the Dominion preparing to take down the minefield at the entrance to the wormhole, they have little choice but to go then and there. The audience is left with a to be continued and one of the greatest Star Trek cliffhangers of all time. This two-parter forms the end of an epic 6-episode story arc, a rare, if not unique, form of storytelling for Star Trek at the time, that sees the beginning of the Dominion War and the occupation of the station. It turns out that we very nearly didn't have this line, however. The writers had intended for this story arc, which continued the events of the Season 5 finale, would be completed in 4 episodes. Realizing they needed more room for the plot, this was increased to 5 with Favor of the Bold as the last episode, and then eventually to 6 with Sacrifice of Angels. And we're kind of glad they did, because even the colloquial tone of Sisko's, well, I guess we're about to find out, it just adds to the tension and definitely anticipates the monumental space battle that would take place in the following episode. Number 2. So, 5-card stud, nothing wild, and the sky's the limit. How do you end 7 seasons of a much-beloved television show in style? With Picard finally joining the poker game and dealing the cards, of course. All good things must come to an end, until about a week and a half later when you start work on the movie. The series finale of The Next Generation is as near to perfect as you can dare to get. Its clever premise is an epic romp across time that allows for as much nostalgia as the old age makeup it requires. The final scene and line are unparalleled in both their effective simplicity and emotive clout. Picard has spent the best part of the episode travelling back and forth through time, and with a little help from everyone's favourite letter of the alphabet, trying to prevent the destruction of humanity, and most of the galaxy, by a powerful anomaly. Before saving the day, although technically he started it, he is subject to the destruction of 3 enterprises. When Picard returns to the present, it is little wonder, therefore, that all he wants to do is kick back a little with his senior officers, all of whom are clearly now also his friends. I should have done this a long time ago, he laments, and Troy reminds him that he was always welcome. Apparently, the fact that Picard never joined a game of poker across the 7 seasons was not a deliberate move on the part of the writers. They simply just never found the time to include him in one of those scenes until the finale. Number 1. Mr. Worf, fire. These are the decisive final words of what is one of the greatest episodes of Star Trek, The Best of Both Worlds Part 1. The line itself may be rather laconic, but it certainly does the job. It is made memorable, of course, by what comes immediately before it. I am Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile. Your life as it has been is over. Picard has been assimilated and Riker gives the order to fire the deflector weapon. Nowadays, the next episode will play as automatically as a Borg's resonance signal, but at the time, people had to wait a whole summer to find out the conclusion of Riker's fateful words. Shockingly, actually, in retrospect, at the time, Patrick Stewart was going through contract negotiations, and so there was actual doubt as to whether he would be returning. And so the ambiguity of that line is even more deliberate, with the writers holding on to the possibility of killing off Picard. And that in itself caused a considerable amount of buzz amongst fans at the time. Furthermore, this was only the second 2-part episode in Star Trek history, the first having been the Menagerie 1 and 2. It was also the first end-of-season cliffhanger for the franchise, and in this, The Next Generation really began to thrive on its own merits. Those final 3 words solidified The Next Generation's place in the Star Trek canon. It was now firmly carrying the torch. And that concludes our list. If you have another example, then do let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit that like button and the notification bell as well. Don't forget to also head over to Twitter and follow us there, and Instagram as well. And I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with Trek Culture. I hope you have a wonderful day, and remember to boldly go where no one has gone before.